Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Green Hub TV show. This is our new broadcast channel dedicated to sustainability. I am your host today with Jean-François Robin, Global Head of the Research at Natixis CIB. So our topic today is about the unprecedented wave of election which took place this year. Over half of the humanity went to the polls, with people voting in 70 countries. It took place, of course, in France, in the EU, but also far beyond the EU borders, with election taking place, of course, in the US, but also in Mexico, in Indonesia, and in many other countries. So what are the consequences of this wave of elections on the sustainability agenda? Over the day, you heard about a backlash and some backtracking around sustainability. So this year was clearly historic, so let's watch a report prepared by your journalist Ava Booker on this wave of election.
"2024 is the biggest global election year in modern history. Citizens from more than 70 countries go to the polls, representing over half of the world's population. Results from these elections could shape climate action for decades. They may determine whether humanity can correct its dangerous trajectory of global warming. Notably, voters from 5 of the world's biggest carbon-emitting territories cast their ballots. In particular, US elections could determine the future of global climate policies. The CEO of Total Energy, Patrick Pouyanné, has stated that the energy transition will unfold at the pace set by the United States. Geopolitical conflicts have caused disruptions in value chains and hiked energy costs, diverting attention away from sustainability issues. Although voting occurred across the world, electoral conditions were not always free. Clampdowns on civil society, especially the targeting of environmental activists, have fueled human rights abuses, as seen in Tanzania ahead of its November elections. Chaos and drama have entangled campaigns, intensified by polarization.
Take a look at what happened.
Je suis, un, atterrée et deux, extrêmement en colère.
On vous sent très ému.
Très émue, parce que ça fait 10 ans que je vis dans une ville tenue par le Rassemblement national.
Winning elections in 2024 was built on running a strong, consequential campaign that places emotive politics at the center. However, environmental concerns and climate change were not hot-button issues for voters this year. This lack of strong sentiment behind climate issues has meant that they have barely featured in most 2024 campaigns. In the US presidential debate, only one question during the 90-minute period concerned climate change. In the European Parliament, the Green Party lost around a quarter of their seats. Sustainability simply isn't winning hearts as the single most important issue in elections. In emerging countries, such as Venezuela, Iran, and Jordan, the already severe impacts of global warming have not led to a greater focus on the environment during elections. These challenges are either not seen as existential threats, or, if they are, they're perceived as intangible and unsolvable. Notable exceptions exist, for example in Panama, where pre-election youth protests led to the closure of an open-pit copper mine, accounting for 5% of the country's GDP. This very topic coalesced voters' interests, and politicians from all sides were urged to position themselves on sustainability. Broadly speaking, greater youth political engagement tends to drive a firmer response to climate issues, bringing climate change and sustainability to the forefront of political campaigns.
So we see that election 2024 is a year of election among many things, and we see as well that it's not at the core of the campaign. So I'm very pleased to welcome some honored speakers with us today, with Philippe Hafner and Henri Weisman. Maybe I can let you introduce yourself, Philippe and Henri.
So should I start? So
Philippe, yes.
Hello everybody. So I'm Philippe Hafner. I'm co-founder and CEO of Hafner Energy. Hafner Energy is a 31-year-old company. It's not so young. And since we exist, we have been involved in the energy transition even before the world was existing. So we could see a lot of cycles, a lot of shifts. And so we are just living now a new shift. So today we are specialized in producing a technology to make hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuel, or methanol, or even syngas from biomass. Biomass being the mother of the living, which means mainly vegetal biomass. So I'm not going to speak about the company because this is not the purpose, but I would be very happy, of course, to give you more information after this meeting.
And very interestingly, Hafner Energies are a strong presence in the US, so we can be debating after what is at play and what is changing with this election we just had. Henri?
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to share the panel with Philippe, notably. So I'm Henri Weisman. I work with IDRI, the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations, a think tank based in Paris. And I think the reason why you invited me is because I'm coordinating an initiative called Deep Decarbonization Pathway, where we are working with partners all around the world, so that's the topic of today, in designing, understanding the nature of the transition that they should be implementing in their country in order to be consistent with climate objectives, but also the national priorities. And obviously, the state of the political situation in each of these countries conditions a lot the way we develop the analysis and the way we conduct engagement in the country.
So maybe to start with, Philippe, if I may, what are you making out of all this election? We mentioned many of them. There was a very interesting election as well in India. We cannot talk about election in Russia. That's not per se elections, but probably the big elephant in the room was the US election. What do you make of all of this, Philippe? First thing first.
Okay, the first reflex would be, this is not good. This is not good because, of course, when we hear Donald Trump saying that climate change is a hoax, of course, this is not good. But speaking with people, particularly in the US, a lot of people believe, and I would like to believe them, that this is going to bring clarity, that Trump's administration will be business-oriented, and that the IRA will not be removed because it's a bipartisan act, and because, and of course you will say that after, but it helps a lot the red states. And also we feel that today we have, it's a non-return point. Energy transition will go forward. The only issue is the pace. The pace might be a little slower because, of course, if we bring some uncertainty, if we bring risks, it's going to delay FIDs. FIDs mean the final investment decision. And this is the point where projects become reality. And of course, when we have risks, it's not good for financing, it's not good for the projects. But still, I think that there is no way to return back. I think that the US will not go behind. The only point is that we will have to face a stronger competition from fossil fuels. Because of course they are going to, as Trump said, drill, baby, drill. So it's going to have an impact on the cost, probably, of fossil fuels. But at the end of the day, I am still quite optimistic about the outcome.
Henri, it seems that environmental questions fail to resonate with voters. How did you follow the elections, and what's your take on the weight of sustainability in during the campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the video showed very clearly, and I mean, that's what you said also, that we cannot deny that indeed climate change was not winning elections. Far from that. In many cases, it was completely absent from the election, and in some cases, it was a winning strategy to go against it. Then the question is, what do we learn from that? And that's, I think that Nelson Mandela said, either you win or you learn. So let's learn. Why? Why is it? How can we interpret? And I think that, I mean, there are probably different reasons, but one of them is that we are entering into the hard part of the transition. For long, climate change action was a discourse. Now, this decade is very clearly recognized as the one where concrete shifts need to happen. That's the reality. And we are facing impacts of climate change, and we know very well that the window is closing very fast if we want to follow the most ambitious path. So we need to take action. So that's a challenge. We need to change the way we behave. We need to change the way we act, and that's something that can be scary, that can be frightening for people. So that's one part of the challenge. When combined with lots of social tensions in many parts of the world, globally, and inside the countries, that's a natural condition that creates this situation where climate change is not a winning strategy. Then the question is, what can we learn from that? And there is one thing which is for climate advocates. We need to change the way we talk about climate change. I think that it remains a source of anxiety. We insist a lot on climate change as a risk, potential disaster, something that needs to change everything from one day to the other. That's that's one part of the reality, but the other part of the reality, which is also something that needs to be communicated more properly, is that these changes will happen, whether we want it or not, better anticipating them than enduring them, and that there are lots of solutions. And these type of discourses, which is coming from science, this is coming from the analysis that we are developing with our partners in all the countries, there are solutions. It's something that is not at the center of the political discourse. So we need to change the way we talk about climate change, not to make it only a source of anxiety and a source of guilt for the people, but also a source of hope, because that's the reality of it. And that's something that I think is one of the lessons we can derive from this wave of election that has happened.
I think we can say as well, probably, that we were more into the end of the month instead of the end of the world. The main concern of people, especially in the US, the purchasing power was the biggest concern, as opposed to, okay, let's have a long-term prospect on green transition. I guess the purchasing power story in the US, the consumption was clearly at the forefront of the win of Donald Trump, my guess.
Yeah, as you rightly said, there is a need to learn. We heard that during the plenary session, and that's one of your arguments. There seems to be a backlash. So to learn, we also need to better understand this backlash. And this is true that the success of the far-right party is often was often accompanied by anti-climate backlash, with ecological policies being perceived as a burden. So let's now watch our video on the shifting or lack of support to green policies to better understand the phenomenon.
The most notable trend is the rise of conservative and far-right parties, which is often accompanied by an anti-climate backlash. Ecological policies face heightened criticism and are painted as a burden which undermines the economy, including competitivity, employment, wages, etc., without mentioning their benefits nor the cost of inaction or alternative policies.
C'est qu'il y a un backlash écologiste en ce moment, je suis obligée de le reconnaître.
Beyond jobs and competitivity, concerns were also voiced regarding the affordability of green solutions. A key example of this discourse is the pushback against the EU and UK ban on the sale of new gasoline vehicles by 2035.
Je suis opposé à cette mesure. Il n'y a que ceux qui gagnent très bien leur vie qui pourront s'acheter un véhicule. Donc,
with parties facing scrutiny for their handling of ecological issues, they tend to favor buzzwords and aspirational rhetoric meant to appease all relevant stakeholders.
A stronger Europe that implements what it agrees in a fair way and that sticks to the targets of the European Green Deal with pragmatism, technology neutrality and innovation.
Je crois, et depuis longtemps, à une écologie des solutions.
Et non pas via la décroissance, comme vous le proposez, Monsieur Bompard, finalement, dans votre projet.
moi, l'ambition que je porte, c'est celle de refaire de la France un paradis énergétique.
Il n'y a rien de pire que l'écologie quand elle n'est pas faite par des écologistes. Parce que ça se transforme en mesures péremptoires, punitives. On dit parfois c'est l'écologie punitive. Mais l'écologie punitive, c'est pas la mienne, c'est pas la nôtre. Nous, c'est l'écologie de la joie, une écologie de justice, d'espoir, de redistribution, de redonner du pouvoir de vivre.
But in practice, candidates often have trouble positioning themselves on specific topics or technologies.
Parti, la France Soumise dit il faut arrêter avec le nucléaire. Et une personne qui dit il faut arrêter avec les énergies renouvelables. Attendez, vous êtes en train de changer d'avis à nouveau sur les éoliennes ?
Mais non, je viens de vous dire que les éoliennes, j'y étais opposé.
Ce que le nouveau Front populaire décide sur le nucléaire.
Sur le nucléaire, on n'a pas bien
Votre
compris,
position, nous sommes dans une coalition. Et dans cette coalition, il y a certaines personnes qui ne sont pas du même point de vue que moi. Et donc, comment on va faire ?
Long-standing positions are evolving. For instance, the Green Party in Germany is reversing its firm anti-nuclear stance following voters' changing opinions.
So a backlash varies. I think it's fair to say, like Patrick Pouyanné says, everything will depend on the path of the US. My personal opinion, a lot will depend on China path, and the Chinese path is very important. And China is 31% of the global carbon footprint, and it is going very, very fast toward electrification. So I think it's not only the US, but still, obviously, the big thing in the US election, and there is a backlash. There is not a single word from Donald Trump in its recognition speech, not one word on the green transition. The global warming is seen as a hoax, as he said. He's saying as well that drill baby drill is saying that the wind farms are killing not only fish, whales, cows, but even babies now. So he wants to dismantle the wind farms, etc., etc. So obviously there is a kind of a backlash. Two remarks on that, maybe before asking you the question on the backlash, both of you. Two remarks. The first one is that, having said that, even he says baby, drill baby, today the US are producing a record high number of oil, 14 million barrels a day. Never before they produced so much. The US are producing as much oil as 45% of the whole OPEC countries. So this is by far the biggest oil producer. Arabia Saudi, it's 9 billion barrels a day. So it's already at the top of what they can achieve. So there is no obstacle to producing oil today in the US. So I'm not too sure it's going to accelerate the oil production or gas production in the US, first remark. And on top of that, if they do so, it will be negative for prices of oil and gas. So probably that will be negative for oil and gas producers in the US. So maybe the backlash will have a second round effect here. The second remark I will want to make is that to go to backpedal on the Inflation Reduction Act is very difficult. You need 60% in the Senate to vote for doing so. So it's very difficult politically to do so. And like you were saying, this is something used mostly by Republican countries, and the biggest user of IRA is Texas. Again, having said that, Trump has said, promises made, promises kept, that will be my only goal during my mandate, and he said he wants to be out of COP21. So beware, Trump 2.0 is very different from Trump 1 in a sense that he has full power. That's King Trump. He has the Senate, he has the House, he has the Supreme Court, he has the national popular vote. So he has a full power and a clear mandate to achieve his promises. So I think we have to be cautious when we say he's not going to do half of what he says. He has said a lot. So even if he do half of that will be big, big, big. So my question on the backlash is the following. Is it, you think, from the inside, since you have some offices in the US, you see the dynamic, the underlying dynamic, do you feel that this is going to be a sudden stop, a deceleration, or in fact, no impact at all of this Trump coming back to power?
So the backlash is a kind of allergy to the complexity of the new energies. And when you could see even in France the Gilets jaunes, it's a kind of backlash against the cost of renewable energies, because the purpose then was to pay more expenses for gas in order to pay for the rise of renewable energy. And many people don't want to pay more. They just say we can't afford to pay more. And the main reason why Trump was elected was most probably the economy, and the economy. And this is something which is interesting, because today technologies are moving very fast, in a sense that a lot of renewable energies are today competitive against fossil fuels. This is already the case today with electrical production. Today, we can produce electrical energy at 20 euro per megawatt hour with solar panels, which is not possible anymore with nuclear, and even with coal, it's complicated. So technology is bringing part of the answer, and somebody like Elon Musk, who is going to have a deep influence on Donald Trump's administration, knows that perfectly well, and he relies himself a lot on electrification. So I don't think there's going to be a stop. There might be a slowdown. It might go slower, but it's I don't think, I think that Patrick Pouyanné said, of course, the pace of energy transition will be given by the US. It doesn't mean that it will stop. It means that maybe the climb will be a little slower, but maybe not, because everything which is good for industry, everything which is good for creating jobs is going to be taken by the Republicans. People in Texas, in Alabama, in Georgia, where we are in the US, are extremely happy with the IRA programs because it brings a lot of jobs, because it brings a lot of wealth. So they are not going to abandon that, and they are going to put a lot of pressure so that this goes on. This is in the US. And in Europe, well, situation in Europe is a little complicated because we have 27 countries not necessarily speaking the same language, and particularly France and Germany. So we need first, of course, to agree and to apply, as Ursula von der Leyen was saying, the technology neutrality, which is very difficult in Europe. Today, we don't have in Europe a clear, as we have in the US, technology neutrality. And I was very pleased to hear that word because it means pragmatism. It means that the best technology must win so that we get the best cost, and only when we will beat fossil fuels, energy transition will be the winner. But until renewable energy are more expensive, it's going to be difficult.
Which is what is happening in the US, by the way. Our US carbon footprint has been reducing by 5% last year, and the year before that, because basically the US are getting out of coal and moving into gas. The gas is replacing coal. That's explaining the good performance in the US in the reducing its carbon footprint. And that is not going to change for what you are just saying, Philippe, for the reason of the mere cost of it.
But switching from coal to gas is a step within the energy transition, because you have 2 times more carbon in coal than in gas. Of course, this is not the solution, but it's already kind of a step.
Yeah. Henri, what can we learn from this backlash, and to what extent we should possibly change the method of the energy transition?
You know, I'm not sure that people are against climate policy. I think that people are against bad policy. And the main problem is that there is kind of a tendency of designing climate policy in an oversimplified manner. So in that case, I completely agree with what you were saying at the beginning of your speech, which is that people are allergic to complexity. Climate change is a complex question. So, I mean, if we go back to the yellow jacket issue, what was it about? I mean, it was raising carbon tax without taking care of the consequences. The problem was probably not really that we were raising carbon tax, it's that nothing was done to manage the consequence of this increase in carbon tax on people. And people were logically furious about that because they were facing a situation where they had no option, basically rural people having to take their car. They had no option. There was no policy package that was designed to acknowledge that, yes, this is something we want to do. We need to increase carbon price, but this has consequences. We need to manage them. And so to manage this, and that's what all the studies show, you need to envisage the transition in its complexity, and you need to design policy packages accordingly, not only in discourse. In discourse, people are very strong at connecting social and environmental issues. In practice, this is not done in most cases, and that's the core of the problem. So what we are talking about here is that we need to change the way we talk about climate change. We need to change the way we act about climate change, because that's the only way to make it efficient, and that's the only way to make it acceptable. That's what we see when you design properly well the solutions, when it's done with consultation, with concertation, with involvement of the people. When you take into account the complex effects and you design policies accordingly, things are very different. But the point is that historically, in most of the countries, this is not done like that. And that's why people may have a kind of shortcut in their brain thinking, okay, we talk about climate change, so this will be again bad policy, so I'm against it.
It reminds me of the what happened with the leasing of electrical vehicles. It's very interesting because we were saying that the modest people, the rural people, were against electrical vehicle. And when we propose leasing for 100 euros in France, it was a huge success, and we have to stop it because too many people were applying for that from modest people, from modest households. That's the first remark. And second remark, people were saying it's impossible to get a leasing of 100 euros is too cheap because obviously that's much cheaper than a thermic car, 100 euros a month to get an electrical vehicle. And we have seen that the car makers were proposing that at half the price, at 50 euros per month. So this is very interesting because good policy works.
Yeah, and it's about innovating, and that's
exactly
the challenge. We are talking about innovating new type of policies, but it's not because they are new that they are not possible.
For politicians, we decided to advocate climate actions. They increasingly link it to competitiveness and job creation. And it's a way to bolster, let's say, economic interest and citizens. So let's now watch our video on the balancing act between competitivity, employment, and climate change.
These inconsistent approaches to ecological issues explained a tendency to adopt an en même temps, or at the same time, strategy, referring to one of the political trademarks of President Emmanuel Macron. This strategy entails a wary balancing act, flaunting ambitious ideals that are ultimately tempered by substantial concessions or counteractions. For example, in France, newly elected Prime Minister Michel Barnier stated,
Je dirai la vérité sur la réalité de l'impact de notre mode de vie, de notre économie sur l'environnement. Nous pouvons et nous devons faire plus pour lutter contre le changement climatique, préserver la biodiversité. Ensemble, ainsi, nous devons maîtriser, poursuivant les efforts engagés, nos besoins d'énergie en faisant preuve de sobriété et d'efficacité. En attendant, le diagnostic de performance énergétique sera simplifié et son calendrier sera adapté. Nous devons faire évoluer de manière pragmatique et différenciée la réglementation zéro artificialisation nette pour répondre aux besoins essentiels de l'industrie et du logement.
Similarly, beyond France, politicians have spoken on the issue.
We must be faster and simpler because Europe is decarbonizing and industrializing at the same time.
We will continue to promote energy sovereignty by fortifying Pemex and the Federal Electric Commission, and we will also give emphasis to renewable energies that guarantee Mexico's goals to curb climate change.
We know that we can actually deal with this issue. The young people of America care deeply about this issue. And I am proud that as Vice President over the last 4 years, we have invested $1 trillion in a clean energy economy, while we have also increased domestic gas production to historic levels.
In this context, tackling the ecological transition through the prism of industrial policies was the most strategic move for politicians in 2024. This rhetoric appeases voters and companies alike, while also allowing politicians to add a degree of nationalistic fervor on the subject of remaining competitive.
Our first priority will be prosperity and competitiveness. We need less reporting, less bureaucracy, more trust, better enforcement, more faster permitting. We will stay the course on our growth strategy, and this is why I will put forward a new clean industrial deal.
What we need has become crystal clear. Growth. Economic growth is the oxygen for our ambitions, the lifeblood of a strong society and a successful economy. We will make Britain a clean energy superpower.
La transition écologique doit être l'un des moteurs de notre politique industrielle.
In India, the expansion of renewables was poised to continue following Modi's re-election. During campaigns, he framed climate concerns through the lens of energy security, implying a continued reliance on fossil fuels. Claudia Sheinbaum and Kamala Harris also took this strategy, speaking to concerns about global warming while touting policies which maintain the status quo. The emphasis on economic interests is also evident in Indonesia. Here, campaigns emphasized economic gains and competitiveness, perpetuating, for instance, cheap, environmentally damaging nickel and coal extraction. Although decarbonization efforts were mentioned, they remain secondary to industrial policy and economic priorities, following the global trend. The ascendance of the competitivity mindset has catalyzed a global protectionist movement, with nations citing domestic security concerns to account for escalated fossil fuel production. As the collective action approach for addressing climate change erodes, countries prioritize energy self-sufficiency, risking the irretrievable loss of historical cooperation in the fight against environmental degradation.
So this is a big question, I guess, between the we need to decarbonize, but we need price competitiveness. So the question is, can we, in your opinion, gentlemen, decarbonizing without putting at risk our price or competitiveness?
I think that we can, but we cannot do it everywhere. For instance, it will be very easy to produce, I would say, competitive hydrogen in let's say North Africa or in Namibia. It will be more difficult to do it in Europe because we don't have the sun, we don't have the wind in the same ways that we will find it elsewhere. So competitiveness is possible. The same in the context that I represent, biomass. The projects will depend on the biomass we find at an acceptable cost. And of course, the place where we make the energy will have a deep impact on the cost. But I do believe strongly that we can today have very competitive renewable energy production as far as we are pragmatic, and this is the key word, being pragmatic. And the big issue that we have today is that a lot of countries are closing themselves. We are instead of making a global cooperation, people tend to close the borders. And this is not going to help competitiveness. What is going to happen in the US, closing the borders, not going to help. But it's going probably to help, of course, to make projects in the US, but they are not going to be cheaper because, of course, in order to be more competitive, we need to be more open and to take advantage of what we have at the lowest cost. But I do believe that the key for energy transition will be competitiveness. That's the key point, because we can put whatever rule in place. At the end of the day, if we cannot produce energies at an acceptable price, then we will have the backlash situation that we are facing today.
Henri, maybe?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the shortcut that fossil fuel is the best way to provide security, competitiveness is wrong. And it's a sign of laziness in the way people are approaching the question. It's just that it's reproducing the old model, but the old model is not necessarily true for now. And you were mentioning this problem of the at the same time, en même temps strategy. I don't think it's a problem in itself. I mean, that's a reality. We are talking about managing social, economic transition together with addressing climate change. That's the reality. The question is what you put behind that. If the en même temps strategy is about having a narrow, short-term vision that just manages things as if things were completely equal, that doesn't work. The reality is, what is a good en même temps strategy? And a good en même temps strategy has two main components. One is anchoring the short-term decision in the long-term vision. That's the only way to provide a trajectory that, enhances competitiveness eventually. For example, is gas a good solution for a country or not? It depends. It depends on a number of conditions. It depends how much gas. It depends to do what, to address what question. And there is still some kind of idea that, yes, it's a magical solution for some developing countries, for example, that they've discovered gas resources. They just exploit it and it will solve all their problems. That's not the reality. That's not the best way for them to address that question. So anchoring these decisions of today in the long-term vision is critical also because addressing really climate change it's not necessarily changing everything overnight. That's not what we are talking about. What we are talking about is taking action where it's possible now to reduce emissions where it's possible. And there are lots of sectors where it is possible to do things today with current technological solutions at competitive costs, but while also preparing the changes for tomorrow. And that requires doing massive investment, for example, today to prepare for tomorrow. And that's something that doesn't provide you necessarily short-term reductions in emission today, but that's the condition to reach neutrality, carbon neutrality. That's what we are talking about. So anchoring the short-term decision in long-term is really critical. And the second thing, and that was also mentioned by Philippe, is international cooperation. That's, I mean, all the analysis, what it shows when you look at the country level, that's what we do with our partners, you see that depending on the assumptions that you're making about what others are doing, you can either do it or not in a consistent manner at the country level. And there are some, again, requirement for innovation in order to build on the comparative advantage. It's very true that Europe is probably not the best place to produce massively renewable sources to provide energy to all the industry, etc. There are some countries which have massive resources of sun to produce renewable energy, and if we manage to build deals, trade agreements between these parts of the world, we've done some studies in South Africa, for example, and Europe, it could have the triple benefit. It supports industrialization in these countries, it supports decarbonization at lower cost in Europe, and it provides reduction of emissions. But it requires innovating. If we stick to the old model, where we are in a competition and it's a zero-sum game, this will not work. That's the spirit of the Paris Agreement that was signed in 2015. That's really shifting from competition to cooperation. That's not what we are seeing today. I'm not hiding that this is a challenge, but that's the only way to go. And if you look at things in detail, the analysis of the situation, it's beneficial. The point is that it requires just to change paradigm, to change the way we think, and that's probably the main challenge for designing policies that we are facing now.
5% of the Sahara is enough to produce enough energy for the whole world. So indeed, great chance for Morocco. Maybe two remarks on what you said. The first one is very hard to oppose growth and decarbonization. Sorry. What we have seen of late is that the US is growing almost at 3%, and the carbon footprint is down by 3%, almost 5% last year. If you look at Europe, that's the same story, but even more so in China. China is going to grow probably close to 5% this year, and we have seen that they are declining their carbon footprint by 3%. So again, growth depends on what you are doing with your growth, not about, it's not an opposition to, so it's en même temps, I think, in that remark. The second remark I would like to make in terms of price competitiveness, the status quo is a dead end for Europe, because if we are staying where we are, which is our energy mix is 70% gas, oil and coal in Europe, and we are producing less than 1% of that, obviously importing gas from all over the world is going to be much more costly than for the US, which are exporting it. So again, if we stay like that, the price competitiveness of Europe, we will have to deal with a price of gas which is 3 times more expensive in Europe than in the US. So we need to move from this situation to another situation. And then we have all this debate in France between nuclear and renewable, which is absolutely not the good debate to have. The good debate to have is what is the cheapest energy and the most reliable 24/7. And I guess that there is nothing cheaper than sun, wind, and probably biogas for that matter, but probably the sun is the cheapest energy of all. Huh? In France, in average, the price of electricity, it's 70, 80 euros a megawatt hour. So if you compare that to what you can produce with sun, we are not competitive, even in our small part of our energy mix, which is electricity in France. So we need to move forward in any case.
Yeah. And just protectionism is not the best way to protect the industries, and that's a reality of the economy today.
Philippe, for a company like Hafner Energy, what type of support do you need from government in terms of incentive, support? They have been putting a lot of emphasis on disclosure, etc., but how can they help?
So the first thing, we need clarity, because one of the big issues we are on the long-term project, so we need clarity and we need schemes that go on and are not stopped each time there is a new election. This is the biggest risk we face is changes of rules. And we have seen that since we exist. We have been existing for 31 years, as I mentioned. And too often we saw change of rules depending on the governments. And this is a big issue because the problem is that the projects, they take several years to come from the first idea to the reality. The second thing is that energy transition, it's necessarily at the very beginning, it has to be a little more expensive, at least more expensive. So public support in order to ignite the pump is essential. And today we are facing, particularly in Europe, countries who have no more money. And so they are putting a brake to help. And so this is particularly the case with hydrogen in Europe. We are supposed to make 10 million tons in 2030. The last expectation, I am a board member of France Hydrogène, which is the French association for hydrogen, and we believe that we will not even achieve 30% of that value. And the reason is that there is a lack, first, of clear support, of clarity, but also a lack of demand. There is a lot of offer and a lack of demand. So, yeah, it's essential to have clear policies, incentives only to start up. We don't need to have continuous, permanent subsidies. We just need some help when we start a new activity, because this is strategic. And so that's the point, clarity and help in the beginning.
Henri, is it the type of proposal and advice that you are discussing with policymakers as part of the Deep Decarbonization Pathway project?
I mean, that's obvious. That's the role of policy. What we show that the transition that we are talking about is systemic and requires coordination of all actors. So governments do not have all the levers in hand. They have some, which are important, but it's not that the governments can do everything. But one very important thing that they can do, beyond all the fiscal management of social aspects, which are critical and are the responsibility of public authorities, but another core responsibility is to create the enabling environment for private actors to develop their solutions. And it's very clear that it's not a centralized system where all the solutions would be designed by a central planificator that things would work. We need some innovation, we need some new solution to come, and the real question is, are we able to create the policy environment that will create the condition that investors, private actors need to develop this solution and to bring them to the market, to bring them in not natural competition. So that's exactly the point. There needs to be coordination, there needs to be a channel of discussion between real actors and decision makers, policy makers, so that their needs are clarified. And indeed, one of the critical aspects that we see is that you need clarity, you need continuity, you need credibility of this regulation. That's the condition to engage in this transition, and that's something that is often missing, and one of the critical conditions for the transition to happen.
So the bar is quite high for politicians, right?
Yeah.
Consistency and credibility.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the key features was criticizing indeed regulation for being too burdensome, and there were many calls for regulatory pause, saying that some of the norms, some of the standards were not helping, they were not clarifying the end goal. And this applies especially to sustainable finance. ESG has been criticized big time across the campaign. So let's watch our last video dedicated to the shady future of sustainable finance.
So what is the role for ESG in light of these shifts? Sustainable finance is suffering as a result of elections around the world. ESG is increasingly politicized in the US context, and many key voices in the EU have voiced frustration with extensive regulation.
Moi, j'appelle à la pause réglementaire européenne.
Oui, l'Union européenne aujourd'hui est à la fois antisociale et anti-business. Elle est anti-entreprise parce que précisément la multiplication des normes environnementales, la CSRD, la directive sur le devoir de vigilance, crée aujourd'hui une inflation de normes pour nos chefs d'entreprise qui n'est plus tenable.
These people are sick. These poorly performing woke financial scams are radical left garbage that would never be funded on their own and certainly never be funded on their own merits. The entire ESG scheme is designed to funnel your retirement money to the maniacs on the radical left.
As 2024 comes to a close, the world may appear to be grappling with seismic shifts in the perception of sustainability. Beneath the surface, however, civil servants, companies, and organizations are quietly enacting low-intensity yet impactful transformations. While the urgency for climate action intensifies, these efforts endure through the tumult of cyclical elections.
So, is ESG too big mega trend or too big underlying to be stopped, or you think it's, again, starting with you, Philippe?
So I can give you the example of a sector where ESG is playing a key role. It's aviation. The reason is that today we are shifting from kerosene, which is fossil, to sustainable aviation fuel. And so there is no mystery, at least for the first years, SAF will be more expensive than kerosene. And the only way, of course, we have the European mandates, but in the US and in other countries, we have no mandates. And so what is the driving force for the airlines to go towards SAF is, of course, maybe the conviction of the shareholders, but I think the main reason is ESG. Why? Because a lot of clients from airlines are professional clients, and they have to comply with the Scope 3 requirements. And this is going to have a significant impact, and they can choose to purchase a ticket which is decarbonized, and they will have to pay a little more expensive for that. But there is also another thing, is that when the airlines go to get financing of their planes and they go to the banks, Natixis for instance, if they have a stronger decarbonizing compared to others, they might have better financing conditions. So when we put everything together, a lot of airlines are just struggling to find SAF that they cannot find today, because today, contrary to other sectors, the SAF sector is driven by demand and not by offer. There is much more demand than offer, because it's a drop-in, because airlines do need SAF, because they rely today at 99% on fossil fuels, and they badly need to decarbonize. And this is mainly driven by the ESG requirements and by the Scope 1, 2, 3 requirements. So this is a very strong example, because aviation by itself is a big part of the energy transition.
Or to be in a business where you have more demand than supply, it's good for you, I guess.
Sorry?
It's good for you to have more demand than supply.
No, but it's not that easy, because to get the financing of a project, you need to get commitments from the airlines with off-take contracts of 10 years, and this is the
consistency point we were mentioning before. Henri?
Yeah, no, I think that, I mean, this is a perfect example of the type of challenge we are facing. And again, the need of the norms. I mean, do we have too many norms? I'm not sure it's a matter of the amount of the norms. It's a matter of the nature of the norms and the credibility they have. I think that within Europe, we are facing now a very hard discussion on the ban for thermal vehicles that was part of the Green Deal for 2035, that is receiving a lot of criticism these days from notably the industries. But that's typically the type of measures we need. That's something that provides a rather clear signal. It's rather long-term, 2035, and I think that it's a very good test whether policy makers can take the line or not, or whether at the first opposition they will step back and protect vested interests instead of promoting the transition. And that's something that is really critical and an important sign of where we stand with this discussion. Why there's some protest now? Because we are entering into the reality of the change. So now for all the car manufacturers, if they take it seriously, they will have to change the way they produce cars, really at scale, to be ready for that. So that's kind of a very important signal that's provided, whether we can have policies that are credible and that are continuous and that are visible. All this, the question of ESG regulation is also a matter of providing signal that help companies anchor their transition in the broad systemic changes that need to happen. The worst risk is to create silos where you have different sectors, for example, operating individually. And the main, I mean, a very obvious example is all these bio-based fuels. Yes, if you take each sector, there can be a solution. They can solve the problem of aviation. They can solve the problem of passenger transport. They can probably solve the problem. But the point is that all of this doesn't add up. If you rely on this solution to solve everything only without doing anything else, it doesn't work. So there is a need to have regulation that provides this systemic vision so that it provides incentive for the companies to insert themselves in the broader transition that is required to reach the objective. And that's a systemic changes. And again, that goes back to a point that we've turned around during this discussion, which is we need to acknowledge that it's a complex process. It's a systemic change that we need to accomplish. That's difficult even just to conceive it. But it's only if we acknowledge that and we try to take measures accordingly without trying to oversimplify things that are complex in nature that we can provide the guidance that the companies need to change, because they have the solution, but they need the clear signals on what are the directions that will need to be taken.
So we could say that beyond those wave of elections, there are good reasons to be optimistic and also to learn from failure and missed policies. Jean-François, what will be your final take on this debate?
Well, I think this is something bigger than just, again, it was around the election, and in particular the US elections. Maybe 2 remarks on that. 2 years from now, we have midterm elections. 4 years from now, we have another election in the US. And again, I think what is happening in the US is very much a very strong underlying movement. Again, last figures from the US, but this year they just installed 20 gigawatt of new photovoltaic solar panels in the US. This is twice as much as last year at the same period, so it's accelerating. Whatever we say, whatever we see during the election, again, this is the US. There are many different states in the US, so I think we can be a little bit more or less pessimistic than at nominal value when we see what Trump is saying regarding this hoax of global warming.
Philippe, maybe you want to conclude on your own.
So I did not.
A word of conclusion.
So yeah. I think that, of course, it would have been maybe easier in appearance to have Kamala Harris. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, investments are going on, projects are going to go on, and maybe some projects maybe even will go faster. And
carbon capture, for instance.
One thing which is interesting is that Europe has maybe a good opportunity to understand that we have to get along and to organize ourselves. And so, I mean, there is probably an opportunity today. What is going on in the US was something which was going to happen one day or the other. The backlash was going to happen. So it could have been later, it's today, but I think that at the end of the day, energy transition will happen, but unfortunately, as we discussed, the consequences of the climate change is going faster than what we were expecting before. So we have to go very, very fast.
And, you know, I'd like to thank you for just this event, because this type of meeting, to some extent, it's very timely for people like me who are just working on all this, with all this policy process, also to engage with these different communities, because we see that changes will happen. We see that, I mean, investors, the finance sector. We see from the discussion that people who are maybe more rational in this world than they are with the elections see that the change will be happening and support this change. So yes, it's very clear. The policy situation is difficult in many countries, and yes, it will create some challenges. But what matters is that we don't have too many delays and that the change continue to happen. And from what I've heard from the discussion that are happening here, this change will continue to happen because there is a clear sense from people making concrete decisions in their daily life that will affect the drastic changes, that this is a direction to go, not only for climate change, but it makes economic sense to go in this direction. That's the future. And the fact seeing that there is kind of a continuous movement that's happening, that is not, obviously, it's, challenged by the policy situation, but it's not diverted from this situation is extremely important. So holding the line for the decisions that are made, that you are making in your daily life, in your daily working life, every time you take decision is extremely important. And we know very well that you have the power to influence policy decisions. So seeing that these changes are happening, seeing the economic benefits that are happening can trigger different decisions by policymakers beyond their discourse. So thanks a lot for this opportunity to be there today.
Yeah, same for me. Thank you very much. It was a very, very good event.
Philippe, Henri, Jean-François, thank you so much. Thank you for your compelling testimony. And of course, you are welcome to watch the video in replay, and there will be other podcasts, and so you will be invited to follow us on YouTube. So thank you so much. That's the end of this emission.
Thank you.